The Swedish economist Knut Wicksell once wrote in his paper, The Influence of the Rate of Interest on Prices, that, quote unquote, "The thesis which I humbly submit to criticism is this. If other things remaining the same, the leading banks of the world were to lower their rate of interest, say 1% below its ordinary level, and keep it so for some years, then the prices of all commodities would rise and rise without any limit whatever. On the contrary, if the leading banks were to raise their rate of interest, say 1% above its normal level, and keep it so for some years, then all prices would fall and fall without any limit except zero." What he coined here was the Wicksell effect. It's one of three effects that happens when the rate of interest changes. The first one is called the Keynesian liquidity effect, and it's likely what you're going to learn in AP Macro or a high school economics course. It simply states that when more money is added into the system, there is more capital for banks to loan out. That means that supply has increased while demand has largely stayed the same. This allows banks to lower their interest rates. And you're thinking, well, lower interest rates means more goods being produced. If demand hasn't changed, then of course the prices of goods are going to go down. But Wicksell offers an alternative explanation for that. He says that when the interest rate lowers below the natural rate, there is a profit gap. Let's say that the natural rate of interest is 5% and you can get a 5% return on industry. When that interest rate goes down to 3%, there's this magical 2% gap. And it doesn't matter what's in absolute terms, it only matters what's in the relative terms. So Wicksell argues that entrepreneurs will continually buy up goods until this gap closes because it's an arbitrage, and that will actually increase the price of capital goods, which will then trickle over into an increase in price in consumer goods. And over the course of this, well, inflation happens, people need more money for exchange, so people are going to go to the bank and take their money out. This means that in a fractional reserve banking system, the reserves are lowered and loans have to be called in, because remember, in a 10% fractional reserve banking system, if even $1 is taken out of reserves, that means $9 in loans are going to have to be called back. And when that crunch happens is when the interest rate actually goes back to its normal level. And there's a third effect that happens alongside the Wicksell effect, and that's the Fisher effect. And what the Fisher effect states is that the new rate of interest in real terms will be the same as previous, but will actually have an added component of inflation. So let's take an example. Let's throw some numbers in here. We have a 5% rate of interest, right? And a 5% return on industry. And then more money gets pumped into the system. Inflation at, let's say, 2% a year. Now, this interest rate lowers to 3%. Now it's below the natural rate of interest, which we're still thinking is 5%. That means that if I can borrow at 3% and make money to the tune of 5%, I don't care the absolute cost of the good. So of course I'm going to keep buying and buying and buying until that is no longer profitable, which raises the cost of capital, which spills over into the consumer goods market. So now these consumers needing more money to enact their exchanges go to the bank and start taking money out. So that means we have a credit crunch. And the interest rate then has to go back up to its 5%. But wait, we still have 2% inflation. That means that the nominal rate of interest, according to the Fisher effect, is going to be 7%. So can you see how all three of those occur within the same rough period? And that's the very basics of the Keynesian liquidity effect, the Wicksell effect, and the Fisher effect. Before closing out the video, however, I do want to talk about Wicksell's main thesis of the interest rate being kept above the natural rate means that prices will lower forever, and the interest rate being kept below the natural rate, prices will rise forever. So let's go back to that effect where there's that 2% gap, and that the profit on industry never changes, and that interest rate never changes. Then I'm going to keep on again and again and again and again doing that 2% return because I'm always going to make money. No correction ever happens because of ceteris paribus. And on the same note, if I'm always going to lose money investing in industry, and everyone in industry is losing money right now, then they're going to keep selling and selling and selling and selling. The supply is always going to increase for a demand that is decreasing or stable, so prices will go down and down and down and down, theoretically until the zero lower bound. That's kind of what Wicksell is talking about.